So Halo Infinite has been in our hands for a few weeks now, and its sandbox has had time to settle. I wanted to give my thoughts on what can be done to improve the sandbox going forward, but I'm sure you have your own opinions on the sandbox, so I encourage you to actually give your thoughts down below in the comments section. Also, feel free to share the video around if you enjoyed the discussion, and leave a like since it feeds the YouTube algorithm those yummy engagements it likes to eat. So, on the topic of weapons, Halo Infinite's weapon sandbox is quite diverse, and there's a lot of fun to be had, but I do think that some of the weapons could use some improvements and modifications. First up is the Ravager. I like the Ravager in theory. As far as the campaign goes, it's a pretty awesome weapon, but in the multiplayer, I think it's a bit more of a hindrance to use it. Essentially, the Ravager is this suppressive weapon with an alt-fire mode that lays down a fire trap, which damages those who walk onto it. It could be this excellent tactical weapon to push back on the enemy and deny them areas or entrances, but currently I think its utility is a bit too subtle and weak. I think there's two ways that we could improve the Ravager. The first way is just a flat damage increase across the board so it's easier to get kills with. But my concern with this approach is that it would turn the Ravager into this nuisance that you can't really defend against online because of how easy it would be to just lob flames of death at people that they can't defend themselves against. It would just turn the weapon into this spammy nightmare. The second way that I'm a bit more on board with is improve the Ravager's speed up time for its alt-fire mode, allow the fire trap that it lays down to have a larger spread, and introduce a physical knockback when impacted by its rounds. That way the Ravager's user can defend themselves against incoming fire by having the impact of its rounds throw that enemy around the environment. A bit like the brute shot, the enemy wouldn't be able to get a solid aim on you since they're being thrown around, thus forcing a retreat from them. I feel like this is a good way to strengthen the Ravager's role as a support weapon and give it a good reason for people to use it in combat. Something I'd also add to further encourage people to use the weapon as a suppressive device is give players XP for using suppressive moves, whether it be knocking back enemies with the Ravager, Repulsor, or Hammer. You know, you could even have like a little plus 50 points suppressed enemy notification on the screen since that encourages people to play in more supportive roles. Now, the Pulse Carbine and the Plasma Pistol are both, well, plasma type weapons, which are generally designed around being support weapons that strip shields, opening the target up for kinetic rounds to take them down. I think that both the Plasma Pistol and the Pulse Carbine aren't doing their job very well. The Plasma Pistol in past Halo games wasn't the greatest at killing targets either, but it made sense since it could EMP vehicles and electronics with an overcharge. The issue with Infinite is that it no longer EMPs vehicles, but the balancing has remained mostly unchanged. Without its useful alt-fire ability, the Plasma Pistol feels very bare bones and dry in Halo Infinite. I think what could benefit the Plasma Pistol most is a slight increase to the speed of its projectiles and a slight damage increase to shields specifically. If the vehicle EMP function truly isn't coming back, then something they should probably look towards are the Halo games in the past that didn't have vehicle EMP functions, like Halo Combat Evolved and Halo 2 on how to balance the Plasma Pistol. Especially Halo Combat Evolved. That game had the Plasma Pistol in a really good sweet spot, even though it couldn't EMP vehicles. The Pulse Carbine is a weapon designed for mostly medium-range shield stripping, but in general, I feel like it just feels confusing to use as a weapon. The slow projectiles and their tracking mechanic feel perfectly designed for the campaign and its enemies, but unlike its brother, the Plasma Rifle, I feel like this weapon has no voice in the multiplayer. The easy solution for me would to just be bring back the Plasma Rifle. That thing was awesome. But that's a bit lazy. Let's try to work with the Pulse Carbine and find a good role for it. Something I would do to improve its design is give it an alt-fire mode. When hip firing, there is no tracking mechanic. This would allow players to lead their shots and have more control over where the projectiles would travel since they no longer have a mind of their own. When using your scope though, the tracking mechanic could come online, and then we could even speed up the projectiles just a smidge and allow it to be this medium to longish range shield stripper. The Hydra is another weird weapon that's sort of a holdover from Halo 5's movement system, which was a lot more twitchy. How can it be balanced for Halo Infinite's less twitchy gameplay? My proposal is this. For the standard fire mode, give the Hydra rockets more knockback and player impulse, kinda like the Ravager idea. This would give its standard fire mode a bit more utility since it could be used to knock things like snipers out of their perches, force enemies out of choke points, and so on. The lock-on mode is one that I'm a bit conflicted on. So my idea is to remove its ability to lock onto players since that's a legacy trait designed for a different gameplay loop, and I'd instead make it lock onto vehicles and increase its damage damage and knockback on them, allowing the missile pod to spiritually return in this new Hydra. If you have better ideas though, I'd love to hear them. I don't quite know how to improve the Hydra without making it kind of overpowered. It's tough since its quirk is that it locks onto things, and if you overtune that and make it too lethal, it could be a very cheap weapon to go up against. So I'm trying to find alternative ways to balance it that isn't just make it lock onto players better. The bulldog. Okay, the bulldog is a really tough one. When I spoke to 343 Sandbox team about the bulldog's role, they said it's not designed to replace the classic shell loading shotgun. The bulldog is a new, more easy to use weapon that's less of a power weapon. The way it was described is you can just pick it up and run around with it. I think that's an okay goal for the weapon to have. The issue is that it did come at the cost of the shell loading shotgun, which had a very meaningful role in the sandbox as a defensive weapon against swords and charging players. So until that shell loading shotgun is back, players will look at the bulldog as a replacement, no matter if that was the intention or not. I have two ideas to help the bulldog in its intended role until the arrival of the shell loading shotgun. My first idea is to make a weapon variant of the bulldog that can kill Spartans in 1 or 2 blasts up close and give it a slowish reload speed. This way, we don't need to completely modify the bulldog, it can remain untouched, and once the shell loading shotgun is added back to the game, we can just get rid of this weapon variant on maps and keep it in custom games for, I don't know, goofing off. The second idea is temporarily buffing the bulldog into a shotgun stand-in, but I think that's honestly way more confusing. Completely altering weapon rolls every few months isn't really the best way to design a game, so I'm leaning more towards my weapon variant idea. So the gravity hammer is a weapon that I had a ton of issues with during the flights. Right now though, 343 Sandbox team has done a ton of work to make it feel less like just a big dumb hammer to swing, and more like a proper gravity melee weapon. At a range, the gravity hammer now has a lot of repulsing. I even captured a few clips on Xbox Live where I saved my ass by throwing an enemy away from me when I was on the brink of death. I love using the gravity hammer in this way in Halo Infinite. I do think the hammer though could be improved even further. The team already said that they're working on further physics-related improvements in Halo Infinite, and I do hope those include more consistent physical knockback, seeing as that does still feel a bit spotty and inconsistent. Sometimes it throws an enemy, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it just kills them and their body hits the floor, not being thrown around. It's a bit weird. I'd also like to see the gravity hammer have physical effects on the player. I want to be able to hammer jump again. It feels really weird to just swing this thing and have no physical effect on the player. The stalker rifle is a weapon that I actually think is fine. When an enemy has their back to you, it works really well in its role. It's fantastic for stripping shields of enemy attackers, leaving a squad trying to capture a point vulnerable. An issue I find though is that usually the enemy always sees me, and then I have little breathing room to use it without being constantly descoped. I think this is an issue that can be resolved by modifying the scope glare of the weapon. For long-range weapons such as the sniper and the skewer, players tend to like having these large glowing lens flares to tell them when they're being looked at by a sniper. The stalker has one of these too. The issue I think is that the stalker isn't really a weapon at the same caliber as the sniper or skewer. It's much weaker, more along the lines of like a DMR. And even then, its rate of fire makes it much harder to use than the DMR. I'd honestly get rid of the scope glint. Halo Infinite's bullet magnetism isn't as aggressive as Halo 4 or Halo 5's, and the game is much less generous with certain weapons. It's hard to land shots with the stalker rifle. The trail from its shots are big, red, and glowing. Players will know where a shot is coming from if they're being sniped by a stalker, and I don't think that the stalker needs this giant ball of light giving its user away. Something I also want to talk about is the assault rifle. So the role of automatic weapons in Halo is a discussion that can become quite a toxic rabbit hole, so I'll just be quick. I personally don't think that the assault rifle takes much skill to take enemies down with in Halo Infinite. I think it's a very easy choice over most weapons in the Arena sandbox due to just how easy it is to use. I do see people encouraging that everything be buffed up to the assault rifle standards. And a concern I have is that if every weapon becomes as easy to use as the assault rifle, it could risk the game becoming unintentionally sweaty, speeding up the time to kill and leaving less breathing room for alt-fire modes and interesting weapon utilities, since the game will be dominated by weapons that melt people quickly at medium range. So instead of making every weapon in the sandbox more easy to use via damage and accuracy buffs, I'd rather introduce some skill to the assault rifle in the form of a consistent bullet spread pattern like Counter-Strike Go. While skill does play a part in staying on target with the assault rifle, I do think that the random bullet spread that it has just rewards chance a bit too much, like the Halo 3 battle rifle. If the assault rifle wants to have long range to it, I do think giving it a consistent recoil pattern that folks have to learn to master like other ranged weapons is the way to go. These are just some of my initial thoughts on how to improve the weapon sandbox. Halo Infinite Sandbox I think is in a pretty good place, but I do think it could be improved further. And I do feel that there are certain weapon roles that are just missing from the game currently, such as the shell-loading shotgun, the plasma rifle, even an SMG kind of role, because now that the assault rifle is closer to the battle rifle in functionality, the game is missing that kind of close-ranged bullet hose. It's a role that I don't think the Needler fills. And I'd like to see something there. Possibly the SMG could return. But I'd love to hear your input on the weapon sandbox. I'm also going to be doing a video similar to this with the vehicle and the equipment sandbox, so more discussions we have, the better on this topic, and just, yeah, give me your thoughts down below. And as always, thank you to the channel members. You guys are fantastic, you guys are pretty snazzy, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Enjoy your weekend.